All right, so guys, we're here today to talk about the state of the oil and gas play in the Appalachian Basin, primarily Southeast Ohio. So, but before we get into it, can you do a quick introduction?
Hi, my name is Dale Arnold. I'm Director of Energy, Utility, and Local Government Policy with the Ohio Farm Bureau, and been doing this kind of work for several decades. Thank you.
I'm Austin Warehime. I'm an attorney here with EQUES Law Group.
Tom White, I'm the senior partner with EQUES Law Group. I talk to judges and juries.
I'm Anthony Kaufman with Kaufman Realty and Auctions, and I'm the president of the company.
I'm Dave Schlabach, owner of Dave Schlabach Financial Services. We do financial services and also in the mineral rights buying business.
So let's jump into it, guys. The play has been going on now for over a decade and a half in the shale play as it was. Now, Southeast Ohio's not foreign to the oil and gas play, going all the way back to Rockefeller's development in the 1880s. So it seems like there's always something going on, and there's these laws in between. We saw a decade and a half to a decade ago massive land grabs. We saw a lot of dumb money being thrown around for a lot of things that ultimately they weren't able to develop in full. This play, as it's evolved right now, doesn't look like that. It's not exactly the same. Though, as you shared from your experience at NAPE last week, Dave, there's interest. There's plenty of interest in Ohio. So Dale, let's just start with you. From the Farm Bureau's perspective and from everything you engage in and everything you talk about, tell us, the guys around the table here, what you're seeing right now.
Guys, I'm seeing that history repeats itself. I've been expecting this because, I do kitchen table meetings with farmers all across the state on a number of energy-related issues. And because of that traffic and because of frequency of meetings, I can see 18 to 36 months in advance of other types of developments. It's interesting. Yes, I've done a lot of solar meetings over the last couple of years, especially in western Ohio and north central Ohio. Those are starting to decrease very noticeably. But I'm doing a heck of a lot of meetings, including 4 just this week, on oil and gas development in this area. We're seeing lease consolidations. We're seeing movement basically from, say, the tier of the counties along the river, natural gas and different things, and many of the companies, especially the ones on this map, are moving further west. People are saying, I signed this lease agreement several years ago and different things. Now they're coming back and it's being reactivated. What's going on? Are things still in effect? What's going on here in different things? And so we're seeing an incredible amount of that. You're also seeing casework with the Ohio Power ODNR Division of Oil and Gas, where they're doing drilling units and different things going further west. And we're also seeing a mix of issues and concerns with regard to carbon sequestration and hydrogen production, because it's using the same ground, the same geologic layers, and you're seeing legislation being proposed as how do you manage the balance between those types of development.
Dave, you're in an interesting position because there's the financial services component of it where you're meeting with folks who are experiencing the outcomes of a lot of these deals, but you're also on the ground. You're actively involved. How has the play changed while you've been watching it over the last decade? What are you seeing right now?
Landowners are a lot smarter this round, for sure. It feels like the leases are better, the opportunities to get information. There's not as many big surprises out there. But no, Ohio's in such a fantastic place right now. You got all the activity in Columbus and Intel and all those things going on. And then in eastern Ohio, in our area, after, some interesting comments from last week in NAPE was, this is a 20-year play at this point in time. The largest company right now, EOG's got 550,000 acres leased, and they're into this year will be production phase for a lot of these companies. So, and the play's just going further north, up into Stark County is going south. Now they're leasing in Morgan County. Yeah. And then, as you said, they're just heading west. So it's going to be a very interesting year, but it's definitely, with companies acquiring this much acreage, they're not doing that just for the fun of it. They know we have some pretty good opportunities here.
Absolutely. Dak, you get a unique view too, because you guys are based in West Virginia. So you get to see the whole basin perspective reaching down into West Virginia and the dry gas windows that are being developed. What have you noticed from not just maybe a real estate perspective, but minerals, anything that you've noticed over the last decade and how it's evolved?
So initially, I would say that there's a lot more speculation that was happening in that West Virginia market, and we're not seeing as much of the speculation in West Virginia, and it might be because it's that dry window versus the wet window. A lot of it has moved across the river into Ohio and further west, and a lot of what we see is just purely on speculation. People buying, selling rights, whether they're looking to hedge against, the potential of it or for it. So they're buying, maybe selling a portion off, keeping some for the long term. But I would say that we've seen that the play, echoing what Dave said, it is moving further west, further north, and maybe away from some of those dry windows.
Yeah. So to that point, do you see people's interaction with owning their mineral rights changing? Because it appeared like 10, 15 years ago, it's like, I get this, I'm keeping my rights, I'm settling this. From my perspective, it seems like there's a much more fluid relationship with mineral right ownership and surface ownership. Are you seeing a change there?
Yeah, we are seeing a change. I think you're starting to see, and it's all kind of predicated on where the owner is in their financial, in their financial state, or just based strictly on their age demographics. A lot of these people are looking, especially as they get a little bit older, they're not waiting for the play to develop. So they're going to go ahead and take the money that they can get because the rights are selling very well. And so dependent on that, and then you will see some that occasionally will keep the rights. They want to bequeath that to the family down the road. But we do see a little bit more where people are at least selling a portion of their rights within the play because they want to capitalize on what's there.
Diversify their holdings on that kind of stuff. We had an interesting situation with some folks that it was the right time for them because it accelerated their retirement plans, it accelerated some of their work to get in and get a sellout right now too. So it seems more comfort with evaluating the value propositions, whether long-term hold, which Tom, this comes to the fact that you've worked with a couple oil and gas engineers here recently in several cases. They're telling you about the lifespan of these wells and what people can expect. What are you hearing?
Right, in working with our folks that we use as experts in oil and gas litigation, they're telling us that the industry standard is to project production for these wells out over 50 years from drilling, which is not what we hear from the industry. The industry is saying, oh, we're going to have to shut these people back or shut the wells back, et cetera. And so that is one of the battlegrounds when we talk about oil and gas litigation. That is, when we are successful on behalf of a landowner in establishing a right that an oil and gas producer did not previously recognize, then what does the landowner have coming to them? And there's that tension. But yeah, our petroleum engineering experts say go out over 50 years.
So let's take a turn here because I want to talk about something you're heavily engaged with. A decade ago, we were concerned about various dormant mineral acts and which one applied to when. It feels like in the last 10 years, nothing's gotten easier to understand.
Well, 15 years ago, it was the Wild West. And I remember you coming to me in 2010, 2011 saying, what do you know about Ohio oil and gas law? I had just retired from being a judge. I had several cases here in Holmes County. I don't know if folks will remember the Rose Run formations and drilling and et cetera. But in actuality, oil and gas booms in Ohio had never lasted long enough in order to develop the law. They lasted maybe 5 or 7 years, and in order to get Court of Appeals decisions, Ohio Supreme Court decisions, that's a 3 to 5 year process. And so Ohio law had not been developed. In addition, as landowner advocates, we were always against the huge firms from Houston or Oklahoma City or Pittsburgh or, et cetera. And to kind of quote Nick Fury in The Avengers, we were hopelessly and hilariously outgunned, okay? But we stuck to our guns. Now after 15 years, we're actually getting a greater definition on the law affecting oil and gas rights. And what we found was, if you're a landowner advocate, you really can't count on legislative redress because the pockets of the oil and gas producers are much deeper when it comes to politics than landowner advocacy groups like the Farm Bureau. Sorry, Dale, but that's just the facts, okay? We found the courtroom is a great equalizer. And the thing that the producers really don't want to do is face a jury in southeastern Ohio, because they're more likely to identify with a landowner than with a row of 16 cowboy boots from Oklahoma City with bolo ties, if you know what I mean, in a courtroom. So as a result, given this greater definition, that allows us to do a couple things. Number one, we can give our clients a better forecast on what kind of case they have, because the law has become more defined. There's a lot yet to be defined. It'll probably be, even after my career is over, before Ohio oil and gas law reaches, let's say, the state of Pennsylvania's law, or Oklahoma or Texas, who have been dealing with this for over 100 years now. Their law is fairly well developed. It also gives our strategy, rather than having to cover everything that might come up in a case, or that a court of appeals or the Supreme Court might be interested in, rather than a shotgun approach to litigation, we can now, when we're slinging stones at Goliath, we can have more a defined arsenal, more a bag of smooth stones that we know, yes, this is a valid legal theory. It's something that has been upheld in the appellate courts. And so it's an interesting time. There's still plenty out there that we need to try to figure out, but we are getting more definition 15 years in.
So speaking of development, in Austin, you just joined the firm, but you're coming from an environmental focus and background. And we had, within weeks of you joining, a really interesting conversation with that layer, the layer of environmental concerns. Can you share some of your perspective from some of the conversations you've been having here since you joined the firm?
Yeah, there are obvious concerns when it comes to greenhouse gas production that a lot of people are concerned about and advocacy groups are concerned about. But as far as landowners and who we actually represent, a lot of concerns I hear from them have to do with water rights and the water usage on their land. And then also very recently, not necessarily wholly environmental, but leaning in that direction, we had a well explode in Guernsey County, and it made big news. And there were a lot of concerns about what kind of fumes may have been expelled from that and may have traveled and gotten into people's homes and things like that. You know, a lot of people are just very confused and don't have the scientific background to really understand exactly what they may be being exposed to, and that increases the anxiety in southeastern Ohio when we do see this start to push west. You know, I'm in Guernsey County, and a lot of calls I'm getting right now are out closer to New Concord in the western side of Guernsey County and the eastern side of Muskingum County. And a lot of those calls, you do hear a little bit of concern about what is the impact to my land if this hits here.
So Dave, you brought these great maps in, and we'll share a couple of the stills for folks when they're watching this. But we watched this, and Dale, maybe you can jump in first here for us. We watched this basically get up to the Harrison edge, Tusk edge, and then down in Belmont and Guernsey edge, and then a little bit, and then stall for years. But you told me when we first met, this keeps going. What are we seeing geologically happen here in what's happening as it pushes westward?
What's interesting, because you see that map, many of the drilling permits, many of the cases and different things are all fully developed in those counties along the Ohio River Basin. And you're seeing all of those companies move to holdings further west. And yes, they are out in Stark, they're out in Wayne, they're out in Coshocton, they're out in Muskingum, they're out in Guernsey. Some folks are even talking about eastern Licking County. I'm getting calls from folks. It's interesting too is that when we talk about education and outreach, and Tom and the rest of you guys are very much correct, and I commend you on this because I'm going to say this, ditto on everything that you've said, is that we have a new almost group of folks because we worked with the grandparents and the original landowners 15, 20 years ago. We're now working with the children. And the education and outreach from square one is there too. We're working with different legislators who are looking at legislation and talking about these things and re-educating them because the veterans that were there 15, 20 years ago are no longer there. We're even working with energy service providers and things, because yes, you're hearing about new technology. You're hearing about, carbon sequestration, hydrogen production. A lot of these guys are saying, well, this is just like an oil and gas lease, right? No, it's a different type of technology. It's a combination of a lease, an easement, a surface agreement, and several other things there, because this is a whole different type of technology. It's a whole different impact on the ground. You have some developers who are working on that sequestration issue, and many of these folks are over here saying, well, wait a minute, time out. We have leases and easements that take precedent with regard to that oil and gas production, and those need to be considered first because we're extracting out, and you guys want to come in and do other things. Helping them understand. I'm reading different drafts of legislation. I'm going, this is terribly incorrect because the terminology you're using, those are not what the definitions are. Helping all those folks is absolutely huge, and that's almost a direct repeat of what we did 15, 20 years ago, but with different younger people, land agents, companies, legislators. Welcome to the world.
Dale mentioned that. It's really interesting, and you're having a lot of experience with that. Is it same players, different face, or are we dealing with wholly different companies that are in place now? Because you sometimes think, well, maybe it's just the same guy, just put on a different mask, and calling himself by a different name, but that doesn't appear to be exactly what's going on. What's been your experience with that, Dave?
Some of the players that were here the first round, Gulfport, Ascent, Encino especially, and then Chesapeake was the first player in the area. They threw a lot of money out, went bankrupt, and now they've actually reorganized and are looking with their new company to sneak back into play here. They might be a buyer of a small company here of some sort. But pricing kind of controls the play. All of a sudden oil is hanging in there between 70 and 80, and so the liquids part of it has been more advantageous for these companies, and dry gas went from 12 to 2. So that's why they left those areas some, but now that's starting to firm up again. So besides everything, everybody knows the geological formations and everything, pricing is still going to determine how quickly they're going to continue to move here.
So, and feel free to jump on anybody of this, but guys, my understanding is the natural gas play is incredibly valuable when it comes to energy generation. And energy generation has been in the news a lot. From 3 Mile Island maybe getting turned back on, to AI's power demand and needs that it has, to locally within state, you've got Intel, who's going to have a massive operation, massive impact, let alone the water needs that they're going to need in that Westerville, Sunbury, Johnstown triangle as it gets developed and the power needs. Do you guys see the natural gas window continuing to be developing and maybe having a resurgence with the power needs that are coming online?
Yes, because I'm going to tell you this right now, and I've sent a lot of people your way. I've had 8, 9 meetings this week with folks in central Ohio, different townships, saying, this guy's come and talked to me about a pipeline system. Why is this going here? And the land agent is saying, well, it has to do with the Intel project. Putting pieces of the puzzle together. You now have major pipeline developers talking with folks about easements. Nothing basically filed with the Ohio Power Signing Board yet. And then you started seeing announcing with one company basically in the Intel project itself, a 200 megawatt natural gas fired turbine generation station, and 3 others coming in within a 20-mile radius of it.
Wow.
You're seeing those things happening now. It's like, I did a meeting last night with several families in central Ohio, and it's like, just get my notebook out from 20 years ago, helping them understand this is what's going on, pressing questions to ask, getting in touch with legal counsel, getting in touch with family planners, because you're talking here about a 6-figure check in some places. All those things are very much coming into play again.
Dale, you mentioned pipelines. Do you think that for those who might be watching who have mineral interests west of 77, let's say, a big thing in the middle of the last 15 years was the huge pipeline projects, Rover, those kinds of things that ran out of southeastern Ohio. Now, do you foresee a need for additional pipelines to pipe the product from west of 77?
Yes, and I'll say this, the pipelines developments I'm seeing, and they're all basically west of 77, and they're going into west central Ohio and different things. We already have the interstate pipeline system. We already have the corridor. We already have 5 or 6 interstate pipeline companies. What I'm seeing basically is trunk lines, service lines, utility service lines, 8 to 12 inches in diameter, hundreds of pounds of pressure, going miles from a city gate from there to go to a central point for generation or for distribution. And so that interstate system is laid. What we're going to see in pipeline development is going to be the trunk lines, the service lines, the utility lines going forward. And some of the things I'm seeing are just absolutely fantastic, and helping landowners understand, appreciate that is huge.
Right, because that's something that's going to be there virtually forever on their land and really restrict their ability to develop their land. That's right. So, okay.
It's fascinating because in eastern Ohio, it's almost a foregone conclusion that you have natural gas in your house. It would be incredibly odd to have a full electric house in eastern Ohio, whether that's from the Clinton formations that were there or from any of the other shallower formations. But the further central Ohio you move and further southern Ohio you move, the idea that you're going to definitely have a natural gas provider is not a foregone conclusion. And so when we talk about this play and these developments, this has massive ramifications, not just with the oil and gas market, but it's going to affect real estate. It's going to affect how people evaluate what services they are. Dak, what do you see? I mean, you've gotten to see an entire 15 years of this development. 15 years ago, we could have gone to southeastern Ohio, Belmont County. We could have bought mineral rights for $200 an acre. And people would have been like, thank you. we would have walked out because nobody knew what was going on and nobody knew what was happening. You couldn't get out of there today for $10,000 an acre if you're lucky, for this kind of stuff. How has all of this rippled and affected that real estate market?
Well, one thing that we've seen is people that have gotten these checks, it could have been from a lease, maybe they actually have a well, is reinvestment in other real estate, or they sold off their rights and they're reinvesting that money into other surface rights, especially from the ag community in those areas there. There is a tendency to take that and then reinvest it into production ground that they can use to run cattle, things like that. So we're seeing a reinvestment which has upped the value of the surface much beyond where it was 15, 20 years ago. I do want to take a step back. Tom talked about something there that I think is critical, and that's the pipelines that go through. So many people think once a pipeline goes through, it's essentially inconsequential. And we will see, in fact, my brother Pat's working on a transaction south of Worcester, and the rover goes right through there. And so they're like, well, we can subdivide this property and we can work with the rover pipeline. But I said, there's additional things that go in as far as crossing over that with a drive, things like that. Have they actually taken the time to understand what they're going to have to do? So there are ramifications that they need to understand that, yes, you get that big check up front, but long term, is it going to offset your ability to, as he said, potentially develop that acreage? And so there are some things that I think it's always important that if there is a lease that is placed in front of them of any type, that they get legal counsel on that stuff.
So you point out, I love that you said that, because it feels like, especially like a rover-sized project, 2 42-inch lines that cut a swath across Ohio, that these pipeline and electric infrastructures and everything going in are like our version of the interstate system. It has almost that level of impact on people's property about being able to even use. You may own it, but you may never actually be able to use it at that point in time.
What's interesting you say that, building upon my friend's comments here, is that I'm working a lot with bankers. I'm working a lot with people with the farm credit system. And many of them are much more cognizant, because when farmers and others want to develop land, or they're going to use that land for collateral, for a loan, for production and different things, the number of small commercial banks that service those folks, the number of farm credit service agencies are taking a look at very, very carefully the verbiage on that. Properly executed leases by you guys right here actually accentuate the value basically of a piece of ground, because the safety, the provisions you've talked about, my friend, are there. Those that were signed on the hood of a pickup truck do the exact opposite. And we have folks basically in the industry saying, I'm reading this, and we take a look at the risk. That's either going to be a much higher interest rate if we take a look at it at all. And that's something that landowners really need to take a look at.
And so education and engagement is evolving. And I love how, Dave, coming back something you said at the very beginning, landowners are getting smarter. They have better resources, they have better advocacy, there's more content for them to consume on all of this stuff. And anybody feel free to jump onto this. Are we seeing the producers change? Are we seeing their tactics change when they engage with the market? Are we seeing that? Or is this press the play on the same song we listened to a decade ago?
It's interesting because when you take a look at the producers there, I'm going to tell you this. There are some who understand the seriousness of the situation and understand the legal ramifications and understand a long-term commitment as a neighbor and have invested in that. And there's others, and I've been with 4 or 5 families in the last week, and when you talk about, is it a person from the company that owns the metal you're working with, or basically is it the land agent? Now, don't get me wrong about land agents. You're talking about a highly honorable profession with 100 years of service in Ohio, but some of those guys, you're following the same kind of strategies and patterns you've seen in the past. Helping folks ask pressing questions to understand where they are standing and who they are talking to is paramount.
What are you guys seeing? Yeah, awesome.
I've had the ability to see a couple hood of the car leases recently that were signed without legal counsel, and I will say the only way I think that they've really gotten better is that the price is a little better on the hood of the car, but the devil's in the details on those. And if you aren't talking to an attorney before you sign that lease, the hood of the car lease is gonna not be great for you in the details.
If you don't ask for a gross lease, you're not getting one.
Yeah.
They're not going to, automatically give you the best lease
What, they're not
possible.
offering it right off the bat?
So that's where, working with somebody you trust that can, good attorneys and so forth are invaluable. That has not changed. But I think for those of us that are involved in the business, we understand now finally you're going to have to look out for yourself a little bit when it comes to leasing and reading into the fine print a little bit. But I think where the oil companies have gotten better is, at least in talking to them last week in Houston, is they're going to stay a little bit more disciplined as far as production. Prices typically go up, everybody comes in and drills like crazy, then prices go down. I think that's going to, at least they say they're going to be a little bit more disciplined, which,
That's until somebody races out in front.
True. That's probably right. But they also know pricing helps everybody. It helps the royalty owner. And there's a number in there that the consumer can handle, and oil companies continue to give us good resources. So I think they're probably a little bit more disciplined this time around.
Yeah, to just follow up on Dave's comment, in negotiating with oil and gas producers, I think we need to understand that they are from a market-driven and stockholder-driven philosophy. To quote Billy Bob Thornton in Landman, which I don't know if everybody's seen, but anyway, between 60 and 90, they make a lot of money, $60 and $90 per barrel of oil, There's a similar range there with natural gas, but their history of the industry has been boom-bust. And so during the boom times, they're a little bit easier to negotiate with because they've got more money to deal with, During the bust times, then it's like, boy, it's really hard, this is what we're going to be able to do, et cetera. It'll be interesting if the industry is able to discipline itself, because then you may see some more norms coming out. And rather than, I never thought I'd be in the practice of law and have to keep an eye on what's going on with OPEC and liquid natural gas shipments from Russia to Europe and all that. But that it's very much, as a landowner, it's hard to sometimes wrap your mind around the global consequences of what's going on underneath your land.
Tom, building upon what you said, especially with the folks and some of the folks we're seeing here, this is not drill, baby, drill. When you're talking about energy service providers, many of them, the immediate at-now time frame is a 30-year time block, and you're seeing it here in Ohio. These guys have a portfolio of leases. They have basically a schedule. They know what the market's doing intermediate, short, long-term, regulatory approach. They have some idea with regard to this, and this is all a very planned approach step by step. I'm telling a lot of folks in that second tier, you know, they say, I signed this lease agreement, or Dad did 15 years ago, and you're just now starting to come here. And I'm going, that's always been part of the plan. I'm telling a lot of our friends in Ashland, Richland, up basically in the Wayne, up into Medina and Summit. They are coming to see you. The question is not if, it's when, and it's a step-by-step progression going forward.
Well, Dale, you used a crystal ball about a decade ago, and you said, give it 10 years. It'll hit Interstate 77. So we'll come to you for all future prognostication on this. So let's talk real quick for a second here, because we've kind of gone a global. Let's start first. Let's start with the positive. What benefits exist for landowners and mineral owners in the play as it currently exists right now?
I can say this, and I'm glad Dave's here. A lot of the conversations I'm having, and refer people basically to this law firm, they want to talk to legal counsel who's well versed in this type of law, which this firm basically is. And that's about 2/3 of my conversation. The other third of the conversation is, we're talking here about funds coming in long term. We're talking about a multi-generational farm. Grandma and grandpa, mom and dad who are my age, the junior partner, wanting to bring grandchildren into the farming operation. How do we create a financial plan that does all of that simultaneously? And having law firms that not only work in oil and gas, but take a look at estate planning and help folks with regard to that. I've had some families, it's a more complex discussion on doing the family plan on how to use and save and plan with the finances than it is taking a look at the oil and gas lease. But that's the complexities of the business, and I'm glad you're here, Dave.
I'm going to point to you then right away, because we have known lots of money has flown through Eastern Ohio. And our fears have always been it flows in and out. It's just in, it's spent on the new truck, on the new tractor, and it's out. But I feel like, and this is where you need to weigh in, people are getting smarter about this.
Well, they're realizing they have if you own mineral rights in Eastern Ohio, you have an asset that maybe you didn't realize you had before. And figuring out, there's some tax consequences. You can sell your mineral rights and get long-term capital gains. That's one advantage if you did want to sell your mineral rights, rather than getting royalties, which are going to show up as income. So maybe paying 10 or 15% on taxes instead of 30 or 40. And then the other thing is just the time value of money. Every situation is different. Dave spoke to that earlier, and that's if dollars are needed now for a medical bill, to save the farm, to put a kid through college. Sometimes having dollars today rather than waiting for royalties 8-9 years down the road benefits the family the most. And that's where we kind of help out with that as well. For those that do we have a lot of clients receiving substantial royalties, helping them plan for that. There's a decline curve. You don't get the same check in year 4 that you're going to get in year 1. You don't want to spend all your money and not save some dollars for taxes and for future things. So helping them understand that, giving them a little bit of an idea what they could expect if they keep their mineral rights, they get royalties. Selling takes risk off the table. We've all seen 3-4 boom and busts. Maybe they're going to drill. If prices drop to $30 a barrel, they're going to stop drilling for a while. And so selling a portion of your mineral rights is what a lot of folks have chosen to do. Take some risk off the table, pay capital gains, help put some money away for grandma and grandpa for retirement, and then keep some for future generations. Always seems to be a very good idea. But recognizing that farm or hunting land that they bought for $400 an acre, all of a sudden they can lease for $5,000 an acre. Yep. That's a very nice realization that you've got an asset that you want to take advantage of.
So economically, obviously, there's a benefit. There has also been community level benefits that have been realized. There's been some schools that have been built. There's been some infrastructure that's gone into place. These are things that are easy to gloss over because they happen and then it's just a foregone conclusion. But there is a benefit to having responsible producers.
Go down to River
market.
High School.
Which one?
River High School.
Yeah.
They were the poorest school district in the state. 20 years ago. Today they've been treated very fairly down there. I know the superintendent, all new facilities, great interaction with the oil companies down there, and now they're in a situation where their community's benefited from it.
Chris, you bring a very valid point, and Dave, I'm building upon what you said. It's interesting is that I call it collective consciousness. For a lot of our friends and neighbors in eastern Ohio, they've had over a century of looking at this. Oil and gas, coal, pipeline infrastructure, electric generation. Whenever an energy service project comes in, okay, where is the table? We're going to sit down, we're going to negotiate, we're going to take a look at a number of things. That collective consciousness has served people well for several generations. We need to do the same thing with folks in central Ohio and especially western Ohio, because when you see these type of projects come there, in their community, that collective consciousness is much different. As a matter of fact, it's not even present. You want to get people really talking, you should go to an Ohio Farm Bureau annual meeting and you get a number of leaders in from several different counties and they're going, you're doing what with a pipeline project? You're doing what with a generation project? You're doing, how do you do that? And those are the things we need to show neighbors and community leaders and local government officials too.
So we're taking a stance of, if you have a good, responsible partner in the oil and gas play, it can be beneficial individually. It can help you take advantage of opportunities that obviously we are not going to tap a shale play on our own as individuals. We need this development. It can be economically beneficial. It can benefit our communities in the right way. What are the cons though? Because the reality of it is you can have a good partner that you're negotiating against with opposing viewpoints and come out with an agreement that you're okay with, and they can impact your community and they can take care of you. But you mentioned, Dale, there are some not great actors. And unfortunately, those are the ones that tend to get a little bit more play in the sense of, but what do we need to watch out for? What do landowners need to be careful from? What are the cons of this happening right now?
I have a couple of different ones. I mean, for current landowners, like we already talked about, thinking about the environmental impacts to your physical land and also the limitations that it might occur on your land as a surface owner. If you do happen to have a well put on your property, you're giving up several acres of physical space on top of the land. If you have an easement, you could be giving up essentially, for a pipeline, you could be giving up a whole swath of land that you can't really cross very well. So the use of your land, that's a con. But also generationally, as a younger person who's just moving back to the area, talking about the price of land going up, it's incredibly difficult for a young person to now purchase even a couple acres and move into the area and build a house. And so the families that are already here, they have an advantage in that. But if you are a person who wants to relocate here or move back here after college and the like, it's becoming more financially difficult to do so.
Yeah. Tom's brought a very valid point. Remember when you talked about the judicial review and things you're doing and about the spacing for these particular things are 3 to 5 years, and you don't really have a lot of time to think about things. We need to tell folks, you need to think the 30-year time block. You need to think in the future. The number of meetings I'm having with county commissioners and township trustees along that saying you need to think out that far and you have the right to negotiate as well as a responsibility to do that too. Families the same way. There's one of the things, collective consciousness is great, but there's also, you've seen this, is that, well, that's 30 years from now. I don't have to worry about that. Let the kids worry about it. You need to do it now. Tom?
That's, Dale,
Yeah.
the phenomenon I call don't have your grandchildren curse you. And the best short example of that is you were mentioning a little bit ago the Ashland, Richland, Wayne, Holmes County market, which in the mid-1950s, Columbia Gas comes in and says, we'd like to have a thermos bottle of natural gas underneath your land and you'll get free gas, et cetera. And all these people signed these one-page leases that gave Columbia the right to do anything they want. Columbia no longer is in possession of those leases. And now I can't tell you the number of times that Chris and I have seen those leases brought in, and saying, why did Grandpa sign this? And the answer is, you got to get rid of the Santa Claus effect of the short term. And that goes for public officials too. Just speaking as a former prosecuting attorney who represented township and county governments, okay? Yeah, I know you're getting a new high school, okay? I know you're getting increased tax revenue for now, but what are you giving away decades into the future? You got to get the stars out of your eyes, and you've got to take a real close look, whether you're a landowner or whether you are a public official, because your role is stewardship for the long term.
There are some real concerns I see as well, and we could take some lessons from other plays, but Ohio is not immune. The issue of abandoned and orphaned wells. You have a producer, and I think you mentioned Chesapeake came in, blew all its cash, and went bankrupt. Well, what if the play wasn't continuing? Who's going to take over that? Who's responsible to the community to plug those wells? Who's going to make that stuff happen? There are long-term risks associated with some of these things that may have massive environmental issues. They may have massive repercussions on land value. These wells are industrial level installations. And if all of a sudden they've tapped out and the company goes bankrupt, who's left holding the impact of that?
Correct, because it's interesting is that we've learned, if you take a look at solar and you take a look at wind development, performance bonding and different things are in there for each individual project. You know, we talked about that in the 20s and 30s for oil and natural gas, is that if one of these belly up, there's a fund, but it went for the whole thing. We have 80,000 orphaned wells throughout Ohio that need to be decommissioned, sealed, cleaned up at between $35,000 and $70,000 a pop. That's going to take some time. Hopefully we've learned in regard to that when we're talking about this development going forward. But that's something we need to work with. Coal mining too, with strip mines and different things, you're seeing the same thing.
You bring up an excellent point. We see, so you'll have a privatized or a landowner well from one of these shallow wells. And it used to be that was such a bonus to the property, because the property owner said, hey, I'm going to get free gas for life as well, I'm going to keep it producing. Well, back in the day, they didn't check those wells the way they do now. So now they're coming out and actively checking those wells, and if the pressure doesn't exist, you as the well owner are subject to plugging that well. And like you said, it's $35,000 to $70,000, and if you have transferred and you have that ownership. So when we go out and look at a property now and they say, oh, by the way, we own the well, that's not a plus.
You're right.
It's not a plus at all.
Tom and I have talked about that, as well as Chris. When that's an exempt domestic well, the number of conversations on a very, very, very regular basis where a farmer will call me and saying, the oil and gas production company hasn't done anything on the well for years, but they came out and talked to me about, we want you to make sure you have your free gas provision. We'll swab the well, we'll stimulate it, we'll get it back into production for that, and we'll sell it to you at a real good price. Mm-hmm. Unless you know the rule, the regulation, and law and how it's written and why, you don't understand that liability. That's other things that EQUES and others need to help these folks with, as well as our legislators understand and make adjustments to.
Well, gentlemen, think about this for a second, and I'm going to set you up. You each come industrially. I mean, we've got 3 attorneys here, but finance, in the play, real estate, and advocacy. I want to ask you for each of you a piece of advice that we would give if we were face to face with somebody about what they think about from your sector and what's going on. So you can think about that while I say this. This is not going away. There's the idea that some people might still consider computers a fad. I think they're around to stay. I think they're going to be here for a while. And in fact, I think they're probably going to be thinking for us here pretty soon. And so, just like computers, this is not something that's going to go away. This is a true multi-generational play that's going to be impacting this generation, the next generation, and the generation after that. And the question is how do we do that as best as we possibly can? So Dale, I'm going to start with you again. What's the one piece of advice?
Well, I tell them this, and you've heard me say this before at the meetings we've done together over the years. It's time to get an attorney, and it's time to get one now. Here's the questions you need to ask, and you also need to understand this. this is going to impact you a number of generations. You need to talk about that around the kitchen table. You need to talk that with your legal counsel, with your family and financial planner, grandpa, mom and dad, grandchildren if they can appreciate it. As a matter of fact, I'm telling a lot of the grandparents who own the ground, if you want to make sure that your children and grandchildren remember where you were buried, you're going to do this right. Education and outreach is huge, and getting it in front of them at all times is huge.
Dave, what's your piece of advice?
I mean, anytime you get into a new venture, one of the first things I like to do is talk to somebody who's already done it. So my best advice always is to make sure they're either talking to a landowner who's been through it, an attorney who knows what he's talking about, but reaching out, getting help right away. And in this room, there's lots of folks who can help with that. And nice thing is this round, it's a little bit different from 12 years ago. I feel like everybody's willing to ask the questions. They have a friend or somebody who might have been through it already. So I think just reaching out for good counsel right from day one is a really good idea.
Awesome. Anthony, what's the piece of advice you got?
Two things. First of all, as you consider a long-term play, I was talking to an investor who owned probably 10 to 20,000 acres of mineral rights across Ohio and mainly West Virginia. And he said on average, as he tracks all the leases he has, 28% of those leases got drilled. So you have to keep that in mind. There's no guarantee that you get a lease, you're going to get it drilled. So you got to definitely keep that in mind. The other one is there tends to be an assumption that if you got a lease in the first part of this play back in 2008, whenever it might have been, that you are, again, if that went defunct, that you're open to be leased again. We've had multiple situations, and you talked about them earlier, Dave talked about them. Chesapeake Gas was notorious for not doing correct due diligence when they leased these properties. We sold one recently, the guy said they're open, they're ready to go, looked into it. Chesapeake had paid them 6 figures for that lease, and those things were all held by production.
Yeah. Tom, what do we need to pay attention to?
Be wise. And 2 sub-points to that. Number one, I'm sure when anybody in this room is working with a landowner or a mineral rights owner, we try to guide them toward making a business decision for their land. There's benefits and there's costs, short-term, long-term. You got to look beyond I'll be able to go out and buy that F-150 and that new John Deere with the initial check, And you got to be wise for not only you, but if you're in a family situation, especially family farm, how can you leverage the position that you're in to be wise for the best use, best return for your property in the future? Secondly, what Anthony just said, the situation that we find so many folks who sign right away is oftentimes there will be some kind of what's called defect in their title. There's a problem in their ownership of the mineral rights. And what we have seen time and time again is these producers and their landmen are so nice to get you to sign, so nice to give you the 6-figure check. But if it pans out that you don't own what they paid you for, you find yourself in court being sued for a breach of warranty of title or something like that, okay? And all of a sudden you're paying a lawyer to get you out of something that a little bit of foresight, maybe a little bit of title work, et cetera, it's a penny versus a pound situation. And so please seek wise advice as you're getting into these situations because you could end up with a nightmare.
Austin.
Contacting a professional is an investment. I think that a lot of landowners, when this comes in, they see the price tag that any one of us throws in front of them for our work, and they get scared by that price tag, not thinking about its investment. You're paying this up front to make some money on the back end, and then you can go talk to a financial services person. You're going to recoup that. If you get solid counsel, you're definitely going to make that money back.
Solid advice, guys. I appreciate this today. I appreciate all of it. For those that are listening, Dave, how can they get in touch with you if they have questions?
Yeah, find us on the web, daveslabaugh.com, Dave Slabaugh Financial Services. And yeah, whether it's just general questions or even something regarding their mental rights, I can get them in touch with the right folks. And Kaufman Realty is great at all that stuff too. So.
Same question, Anthony. How can they find you guys if they have questions?
Same thing, kaufmanrealty.com. By the way, it's Realty. There's no I. It's not Reality. It's Kaufman Realty. And it is one F.
Dale, and I know you work primarily with Farm Bureau members, but if people have questions, how can they get
They
answers?
can still go to our website, ofbf.org. Just write a message that you want to talk to Dale Arnold. It gets to me.
Well, and obviously finding the EQUES guys, just go to equus.law and we're good to go. So, gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate your time today.